former NFL scout. He's at the Volume. He's my buddy. Covered the NFL for 15 years. John Middlekauff, scouted with the Eagles. You know, it's interesting. You know the Eagles really well, and I put them on the Belichick list, is one of the things I've always appreciated about them is they've moved off winning coaches, Chip Kelly, Doug Peterson, Andy Reid. I was told there are concerns about Nick Sirianni that if you take Shane Steichen, now an Indy, out of his career, he's struggled with his side of the ball, offense. You tell me your take on Jeffrey Lurie, John, and what if Sirianni, what if they're good, not great, and what if Jalen Hurts, continues to be a little bit less than we thought he was when they paid him?
Well, I think they thought long and hard about Bill Belichick last year. After the ending of that season, historic collapse, I think it was a very real possibility. Now, it would have been the first defensive coach that Jeffrey Lurie has hired. He has an offensive, if you think about it, Andy Reid, Doug Peterson, Sirianni, Chip Kelly.
Yeah.
It would have been a little out of the norm, but Jeffrey Lurie's a Boston guy. And there was a NBA Finals game where Jeffrey Lurie was there with about 25 players. I don't think the 25 players drove. I think he brought them all.
Yeah.
So that area, he's obviously played Belichick twice in the Super Bowl. So I definitely think that's a possibility. I just have a hard time now that you get Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio, who clearly they wanted last year. I don't see how they're not good. Now, Super Bowl good, who knows? But I think they're going to be in the playoffs. And this gets to the Giants conversation with Saquon Barkley, a little like Christian McCaffrey. You put him there. They have so many pieces. I'm not saying you and I could lead them to 10 wins, but I think we'd be pretty competitive. Now you add Fangio, one of the best defensive coordinators. Listen, Sirianni, a little bit of a hothead, motivator. He's a CEO, but I kind of like my CEOs to be a little older. He's a younger CEO, but he doesn't have to call the offense because a couple years ago, like you said, Shane Steichen. Now he's got Kellen Moore, who's ran an offense forever in Dallas. Hit some speed bumps last year, but anyone would working for Brandon Staley. I expect the Eagles to be pretty competitive.
Yeah.
Now, if they lose in the first or second round because of the expectations of the city, a little like the Lakers or the Yankees, it doesn't fly, especially with a payroll like they have and the talent. You never know. They're definitely a wild card. I would disagree with you a little bit, though, on the Giants for Belichick. I do think they're a team. They have some defensive pieces. The owner, pretty old school. Bill's obviously been there. They have a relationship. I don't think there is any amount of money in the world to get Belichick to go to the Jets, but I do think the Giants would be lingering out there if they have a bad season. That when you look at their roster, I don't see how they're going to be any good.
So I'm watching HBO Max. I'm watching the Mara conversations with Joe Shane. And I've got to tell you, there's a couple of moments. I know a lot of that stuff, it's people acting for the cameras, but there are these body language moments every year on Hard Knocks. When Des Bryant was in Dallas chewing out a coach, his career, basically, his market disappeared. Antonio Brown, cryo-freezing his feet. Like his market, like he got a crazy label. And I've watched that. I want to play this, the Hard Knocks video. You got the owner covering his head, the Saquon Barkley move, Joe Shane smiling, the middle management guys around him won't make eye contact. Let's play the tape. By the way, his source said Philly was out. Also not great telling your boss. Yeah, I don't know. I watched that, and I thought to myself, Saquon Barkley is going to crush for the Eagles, come back to haunt the Giants. What do you make of New York football teams right now? There's talent everywhere on both defenses, Giants, Jets. What do you make of that interaction there? I just can't see Les Snead and Stan Kroenke having that moment.
Well, I would say the number one thing, having been around Howie Roseman, a GM has to have just locked down is information, because your entire job, it's a little bit like a stock trader, right? When it comes to coaches, when it comes to players, when it comes to trades, you have to have an understanding of the market. That means knowing what other GMs are thinking. That means knowing what the agents are thinking. That means understanding the value of contracts. They made this big deal about Saquon Barkley not paying him. Well, a couple years ago, let's say 4 or 5, the running back contracts were just a little out of whack and they were backfiring. Well, now they're a bargain, right? One day a house is overvalued. The next day it might be undervalued. Things change. The Eagles got Saquon Barkley for $26 million guaranteed. His cap hit this year is $3.8 million. For example, to contrast that, Daniel Jones, $92 million guaranteed. His cap hit this year is almost $50 million. I think there are two teams. If you're going to lose Saquon Barkley, listen, if he goes to the Cardinals, if he goes to the Vikings, if he had gone to the Bears, who cares? Under no circumstances could the guy go to the Cowboys or the Eagles, but especially the Eagles. You saw John Mara's face. You know why? He knows he's going to be successful there. How's he not going to be successful there? It's a little like once McCaffrey got to the 49ers. Now, McCaffrey's a better player, but it seems like it's going to work and it's going to work really well. And they didn't pay him very much money. So Joe Shane, I give them credit, even though I think the NFL kind of forced them. They have been very open in terms of the editing of this. Like, we've got a lot of good inside information in terms of how he connects with the agents, how he talks with his staff. But seems like a nice guy, seems a little over his head.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
I just know Howie Roseman, I mean, would have flipped a lid at this point in time in the process if he doesn't have all the information. Now, obviously, you don't know everything the other teams are going to do, but his Joe Shane's right-hand man, Brandon Brown, worked for Howie for years. So for them not to understand that the Eagles weren't just, I mean, they kind of knew they were interested, but they were really interested. And it was pretty clear. And then they signed him. So you saw John Mara's face. Listen, they have now a history post Tom Coughlin of firing a lot of people. And I don't see how the Giants are going to be very good. And if Saquon goes to have success, the writing's on the wall. I mean, all these guys are going to lose their job.
You were with San Francisco in that area for years. So Brandon Aiyuk and Deebo Samuels said he wanted out and they signed him. Brandon Ayuk's been a bit more forceful in social media and leaks. But now Ricky Pearsall, the first round receiver, gets hurt with a non-football injury.
Not ideal.
What do you make of that, and what do you make of Aiyuk? My take is Brock Purdy's not a big arm guy. I think you could get a first rounder for Aiyuk if Pearsall hit, but that's a dubious early injury. What do you make of that Aiyuk situation, John?
Yeah, I think the problem of trading Aiyuk at this point for a pick is the 49ers aren't in big picture mode. I mean, let's face it, they're kind of Super Bowl or bust this year. Last year was pretty devastating. This team, I mean, George Kittle's 30 years old. Trent Williams is 35 years old. Deebo has a lot of wear and tear on those tires. I think the situation became complicated. Once they signed Deebo Samuel, they could have afforded Aiyuk at a large number if Christian McCaffrey didn't exist. But then they traded for Christian McCaffrey, and he immediately became, I don't know, LT or Marshall Faulk 2.0, and Debo's already under the contract. If they were both in this situation, I think they would choose Aiyuk over Debo. But Debo's under this contract, and he's on the team. And I think the 49ers, the way they, build their offense or, scheme their offense and play, Ayuk's never going to be a 105, 110 catch guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown, which he saw the money he got and he wants that. The problem is they're never going to throw him that many balls. So does it pencil to pay Aiyuk this much money? They had a deal on the table for $26 million a year, and then the market exploded and then it got really complicated. Here's the other thing with the 49ers.
Yeah.
Parag Marate, who's their contract guy, is a very, very tough negotiator. And they always pay their guys. But look at Nick Bosa, who I'd argue is the second best player on the team if you consider Trent the best player. He did not sign his contract till the week before week one last year. So they don't just hand over money just because you're a good player. And I also think they understand the big picture of this operation. They like this player a lot. He's a winning player. He's a talented player. He's a productive player. I do think it just gets complicated the way they've constructed. They have a lot of high priced guys. I mean, George Kittle makes a lot of money. Fred Warner makes a lot of money. Trent makes a lot of money. McCaffrey makes a lot of money. And obviously Purdy next year is going to get paid, but a lot of Purdy's success has been with Aiyuk. It's just a complicated situation. I can't envision them trading him for a pick because that does not help them this year. Now, I don't care what you do, you got a price for whatever you have. If someone blew them away, like offered 2 first round, but who's doing that, Colin? I think 2 years ago, they thought about trading Aiyuk because they they could see this coming. And that year when Zay Flowers and Jordan Addison, those guys in the early 20s were drafted. But ultimately, the Vikings and the Ravens drafted those two players, and they're really good players, and they're cheap. So how does it make any sense for these teams to trade, the playoff level teams, a first round pick that's going to be in the 20s when they can just draft one of those players? Brandon Aiyuk was the 27th pick in the draft, right? That's where you could get these type talents at $3-4 million a year for 4 straight years till you have to deal with the 5th-year option. So I think this is going to go into camp. I think it's going to continue to get ugly, and I think Ayuk is going to continue to express his frustrations.
So finally, I did a top 10 coaching list yesterday, and one of the reasons I thought about it because you at the Volume and on your podcast had done it several days earlier. So we both have Sean McVay and Andy Reid near the top. My list is Reid, McVay, John Harbaugh. I didn't count Jim because I haven't seen him in years, but my guess is he'll be top 5 very quick. You did not have Sean Payton anywhere in your top 10. I had him very high. You had Shanahan 1. I think he's had too many meltdowns in high leverage games in the fourth quarter, but I do acknowledge that if he gets a trophy, he'll go right back up. I just feel in those big leverage spots, he's had some real disappointments, and often Andy Reid has been at his very best in those high leverage moments. Belichick at his best. John Harbaugh at his best in those leverage moments. But you don't have Sean Payton anywhere in there, and we mostly agree outside of that. You like Dan Campbell more than I do. Situationally, I think he's a bit too emotional, but I do love him. Give me your take on Sean Payton in Denver this year, and despite the fact that he turned around, at the time, the worst franchise in America in any sport, the Saints, you don't have him top 10. Why?
Yeah, I think it's a fair argument. Sean Payton and Kevin Stefanski, who did something similar in Cleveland. He hasn't been to the playoffs in a while here, Colin. He took a year off. This is obviously a big next couple years, what he can do with Bo Nix. He could easily jump back in. I think the Dan Campbell situation, a little like Sean Payton when he got to New Orleans, right? He takes over the Lions. Anyone who goes to Ohio State or Alabama is going to have success. But like what Lane Kiffin's doing at Ole Miss is remarkable. And that's kind of how I look at Dan Campbell. To me, Sean Payton, we'll see. I mean, obviously his resume speaks for itself, but part of it I was drafting for the next 3 or 4 years. And I'm a little dubious. I think that division is going to be very, very difficult. And clearly his squad, not his fault because of the Russell Wilson situation. They're not going to be as talented. I had Jim Harbaugh, I think, as my third. Anyone looking at that graphic, I removed Andy Reid. It's like drafting the best NBA players in the 90s and taking out Michael Jordan. So I just removed because he's the lock number 1 pick. I just think if you wanted to argue John's over Jim, I personally would take Jim. I expect Jim to be awesome. I think the Chargers are going to make the playoffs this year. So you look at Sean Payton's division. Obviously, the Raiders are a mess. But in terms of Jim Harbaugh and Andy Reid, I would have him as the 3rd best coach in the division. So I just think it's going to be difficult. I'm also kind of betting on the future on some of these guys. I think LaFleur last year proved he's a star, what he did with Jordan Love. I know you and I are very, very high on Shane Steichen. Tomlin, if you wanted to remove Tomlin and put in Sean Payton, I wouldn't argue. But part of this was like, betting on the next 5 years. I'm super high on D'Amico, super high on Steichen.
Yeah.
I think Sean McDermott, I know you've been critical of him. He's dominating that division.
Yeah.
And, we'll see what happens this year with the health of the Jets. I think the Dolphins are going to take a step back. But if he wins it again, that's 5 straight years winning the division. We can quibble with his success in the playoffs, and that 13-second, loss to the Chiefs is an all-timer. But just in terms of last year, to me, he earned, a lot of equity with the fans and just like his resume in terms of they're 6-6. They had no business winning that division. They had a million injuries. And when the dust settled, what happened? They were hosting playoff games because they won the division again. So to me, Sean Payton, you make the playoffs this year, which I think is going to be pretty difficult with a rookie quarterback. But it's not like I think the guy is not good.
Yeah.
I just think the last 3 or 4 years, just hasn't been as good.
Yeah. John Middlekauff, 3 and Out, the podcast at the Volume, former NFL scout for the Eagles. As always, good seeing you, buddy.
Good to see you, Colin.
Hi, everybody. It's me, Uncle Colin. Subscribe here to get the latest from the herd, including exclusive behind-the-scenes videos, and more, wherever you may be, however you may be watching. Thanks again for making us part of your day.